The following interview is being conducted as part of the Price of Freedom Oral History Series, sponsored by the Madison County Military Heritage Commission to inform the public of the sacrifices made by veterans in our community on battlefields around the world. We wish to thank the Huntsville School System and the ETV Broadcast Center for their help in presenting this Military Heritage Program. Hello everyone, I'm Tom Kennemer. Welcome to our program. Today we'll be talking with U.S. Army veteran Mark Sullivan. Mark served 27 years in field artillery in the U.S. Army. He was also a paratrooper. Before retiring as a full colonel in 2013, Mark had served 5 combat tours in Iraq. For his service to our country in Operation Iraqi Freedom, Mark is the recipient of the Bronze Star Medal with Valor and was inducted into the Madison County Military Hall of Heroes in 2017. Mark, it's a pleasure to have you with us, sir. Thank you for your time. Appreciate you being with us. Now, are you originally from this area? Where were you born?
Well, I was actually born in Aberdeen, Maryland, Aberdeen Proving Grounds. My father was also a retired service member. So I was born in Aberdeen, but I literally spent about 2 weeks there before I was shipped off with my military family to Germany. And then really for that period, through about the next 16 years, I'd traveled around the world with my father as he served. Eventually we settled back in Huntsville, Alabama back in 1980, where I attended Grissom and completed grades 10 through 12 and graduated from Grissom High in 1983.
And your dad, of course, would he retire from the military? He was.
He spent 24 years in the Army, two-time in-country Vietnam veteran, which I'm particularly proud of, and ultimately retired in Huntsville, Alabama, where he worked for Teledyne Brown Engineering. While he was in the Army, he worked the Persian missile program, and so he transitioned from being a service member over to the civilian world, working similar programs here in Huntsville.
I see. Now, did you have brothers and sisters maybe that served in the military?
Yep, got a twin brother.
Okay.
So together, he also served 27 years in the Army, different branch of service, but together combined, we've got over 54 years of military service.
Wow.
And 8 deployments together.
Yeah. Now, were you involved with the ROTC at Grissom?
Not at Grissom. I got involved with ROTC at Jacksonville State University as a sophomore studying down there. My brother, again, signed up for an ROTC course, and I thought, well, he's not going to get away with this. I'm going to sign up for an ROTC course as well.
Right.
So, you know, we took a couple of courses during our sophomore year in college and found an interest in ROTC and ultimately joined the program in our 3rd and 4th year.
So you kind of knew at that time, Mark, that you maybe wanted to make it a career as your dad did?
Well, you know, I didn't know at the time. If I look back, you know, as an 18-year-old boy, I didn't really know what I wanted. But I saw the ROTC. I enjoyed the camaraderie, the teamwork. I enjoyed working with other members of the team, if you will, and so that was something that was of interest to me. And so when my brother and I joined as juniors at Jacksonville State, we just carried it through until we graduated and were commissioned second lieutenants back in 1988.
Why did you choose field artillery? Was that what your dad was in?
No, my father was an ordnance officer.
I see.
And quite honestly, I didn't choose artillery. Artillery chose me.
I see. Okay.
So when you're in your senior year in school, you get to prioritize what branch of service you'd like to serve in, but ultimately the Army makes that decision for you. And so I think artillery might have been 3rd or 4th on the list in terms of career fields. Ultimately, the Army chose that for me.
Well, tell us about the training in field artillery. Where did you have to go and what all involved?
So there's 2 core courses in the field artillery. There's the basic course. So when you become commissioned as a second lieutenant, before you can go out and serve in your first duty assignment, you go to what's called the field artillery basic course. And so depending on your skill set or your rank, so for example, second lieutenant, they taught me a variety of skills. I wasn't an expert in 1 or 2 specific skills, but kind of a tradesman in a lot of skills associated with the field artillery, as opposed to a non-commissioned officer or an enlisted soldier who has a specific skill set that he trains extensively on. In the basic course for artillery officers, they give you it's more of a broadening experience in terms of skills, knowledge, abilities, and that sort of stuff. So the basic course is as a second lieutenant. You move on to your first assignment. Following your first assignment, you can go back to your schoolhouse, and this was at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and complete what's called the career course. And so I did that as well. And that just, again begins to teach you to think more critically, more creatively at a higher level in the Army. So those are the two basic courses, and then certainly there are some other courses available out there that will, provide additional skills, just make you a better well-rounded officer.
Yeah. Well, what was your basic job, though? What in field artillery? What did you do? Finally settled in on.
Well, what I like to tell people is, field artillery provides lethal and really non-lethal fires in today's age. As a young lieutenant, we shot a lot of artillery. I'd served in 155 artillery units as a lieutenant. I moved to Fort Bragg as a captain, served in some lighter artillery units that had a smaller weapon system. But for the most part, we provided indirect fires to our maneuver brethren, infantry, armor, in a supporting role.
Now, you're also a paratrooper. How did you get involved with paratroopers? You want to branch out here?
Okay, well, I don't know if I can branch out. So again, I didn't choose paratrooper. Paratrooper chose me.
I see.
So when I left the career course at Fort Sill back in 1993, I was assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division. Oh. So I did.
They do a lot of jumping.
Yeah, they do a lot of jumping. So back in 1986, while I was in ROTC, I did have the opportunity to go to airborne school, and so what they commonly refer to as a 5-jump chump, where you actually go through the course and you earn your basic airborne wings. So, of course, now having that skill set, when I left the career course back in 1993, I was assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division, and so, as I said, they selected me. I didn't select them, but I'll tell you, besides the 3rd Infantry Division, the 82nd Airborne Division was, certainly one of the most rewarding opportunities I've ever had in the 27 years of military service.
Do you also serve in 101st also?
No, all of my operational assignments, for whatever reason, have either been with the 3rd Infantry Division out of Fort Stewart, Georgia, or the 82nd Airborne Division, 18th Airborne Corps. My last operational assignment before I retired was actually at Fort Bragg in the 18th Airborne Corps. Had an opportunity to jump out of my last airplane at the age of 44, and as a colonel in the United States Army. And of course, at that age and at that point in my career, I said, what in the world am I doing jumping out of airplanes at my age and in this, but anyway, this absolutely great experience. Yeah.
Mark, tell us about that first experience. What was it like, jumping out of a plane for the first time? You have butterflies. Describe that for us.
Scared to death. I mean, I didn't know what I was getting into. Did
anybody have to push you, or didn't?
No, but here's the deal with jumping out of airplanes. There's only one way out of the airplane. Right. Once you take off, you're going to leave that door. You are not going to land. That's a guarantee. They tell you that when you get in the aircraft. There's only one way out of this airplane is jump out that door. So in the basic airborne course, what they tell you is you're going to have 1 night jump and 4 daytime jumps. Well, all of my jumps were nighttime jumps. The one I actually jumped in at night, and the other 4 where I had my eyes closed leaving the door, because it was just it was a really different experience, but amazing. I mean, invigorating. Once you leave that airplane, it's just it's like a big ride. Yeah.
How many jumps did you make in your career?
A total of 48.
48.
And my last one again was at age 44. At Fort Bragg back in 2010. Yeah.
Were you ever injured? A broken leg or anything like that?
Now there was one jump though. They use airspeed and direction to determine what the offset is for an airplane. So I'm going to jump out of the aircraft at a certain location, but I'm certainly going to land somewhere else based on the speed and the direction of the wind, all that sort of stuff. But one of my last jumps, when I left the aircraft, I was already over the trees, and I wasn't coming back in the direction of the drop zone. So I knew I was in trouble, if you will. So I ended up landing in about a 6-foot creek. My parachute was snagged up in the trees, and I was about 2 miles off the drop zone. But to my amazement, there was a hunter out there on a 4-wheeler, and we loaded up my gear, and he hauled me back to the drop zone.
Wow.
So, but it was in, when you jump out and you're already over the trees and you're not coming back towards the drop zone, you got the rest of the time you're jumping to think about it.
It's always good to have a little civilian help.
Sure.
Occasionally, when the need arises, Mark, in 2003, you received the Bronze Star Medal with Valor for your heroism during Operation Iraqi Freedom. Tell us about that action. And what rank were you at?
I was a major.
Yeah.
This was back in 2003. We'd spent about 6 months in 2002 over in Kuwait preparing for the mission, if you will. I was assigned to 3rd Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division. So again, we spent 6 months in Kuwait training for what was going to occur in 2003. And then in 2003, 3rd Brigade happened to be the lead brigade of the 3rd Infantry Division, and the 3rd Infantry Division being the lead division for the Army that attacked up along the Euphrates Valley into Baghdad. It ended with 26 days of sustained combat, very intense fighting. really from the time we crossed the international border, the border from Kuwait into Iraq. And we carried on for 26 days, ending up on the north side of Baghdad, linking up with the Marine Corps on, I can't remember, one of the objectives up there on the north side. But pretty intense fighting, but not particularly concerned. I was with a great group of individuals. We'd trained very hard for it, a lot of confidence. And one of the ways, if you will, to overcome some of the fears associated with the battle is just to train. Think of it, train intellectually, train physically, train mentally for what you know is inevitable. It's going to happen, right? And then it's not easy, but it's a little easier to accomplish, right, knowing that you've prepared for this day or for this moment, whatever the case may be.
Now you had mentioned it's almost a month of sustained combat. But your unit no casualties, right? I mean, you were very fortunate.
We had some combat wounded and some injuries along the way, but no deaths for the entire brigade, which was pretty phenomenal. Yeah,
and it was like 26 days here. I mean, you went without bathing and stuff like that. I mean, when you're in combat, tell us a little about that.
Well, first three days I didn't sleep, and so I mean, but the adrenaline is overwhelming. So I mean, I didn't even think about it. We had to get to a certain location in a certain amount of time, right, and it just required us to continue to move, continue to fight until we got to where we needed to be, to allow, to set the conditions for future operations. Bathe, I remember probably had a 2-gallon bucket that I used to wash my clothes in, and the same deal with baby wipes back in those days. They were off the chain. I mean, between that's how we bathed, buckets, that's how we did our laundry, that sort of stuff for about 26 days.
You just do it. That's part of the training.
That's right.
You accept it.
Exactly.
Now you served 5 combat tours in Iraq. Each one was during some type of conflict. How do you adjust to that, Mark? I mean, there has to be thoughts of being killed, as you touched on just briefly, of being killed or wounded at any time.
Well, it goes back to what I said earlier. You got to prepare. First of all, we train every day, back here in the United States as part of an organization, in hopes that an event like this may never occur, but when it does, and if it does, and in our case, when it did, we were ready. So we were confident. We had all the skills necessary. We knew we could win, so we were confident. But again, leading up to that, I think the last 10 days before we crossed the border in 2003, we watched all 10 episodes of Band of Brothers, and it was just a motivational thing to kind of get us in the spirit of fighting and getting ready for what we knew was going to happen. But again, small things like meditating or thinking about, talking about what you think is going to occur in preparing yourself mentally, physically, and intellectually for something that's going to take place. When it happens, the adrenaline is over the top. You have an extreme amount of confidence in what your abilities are. Now, when you cross the border, certainly anything can happen. But anything can happen back here in the United States as well. So, and I thought when I was younger, if something's going to happen to me, if it happens to me here, that's okay, because it happens for a good reason. Right. Yeah. So I wasn't terribly concerned about it.
I ask all of our veterans, Mark, about when they're in combat, is it okay to be afraid or scared? How would you answer that? Is it okay to do that? I mean, you go back to your training, I know that, but is it okay to be afraid and scared?
Sure, because you don't know what's going to happen. Right. So, there is a certain level of fear there. But I think, and I hate to keep reverting back to it, I mean, you can overcome that, that fear with confidence in what you're about to partake in. If you know that you're doing good for your nation, you're trained, you're ready to do it, whatever the mission is, and you execute. And so, even back in 2003, before we crossed the border into Iraq, we were ready. I wasn't concerned at that point. I was anxious to get started because I knew it was going to happen. And I was just anxious to get, so I was more anxious than I was nervous or scared or.
You got time to think about some of these other things.
Right, and then as soon as you cross the border, there's no time to think about that. It's you're on a mission, and you execute like you'd planned. Of course, no first contact survives the plan, if you will. So I mean, things change, but we're very adaptive,
Right.
and we were able to do that for the 26 days leading up to Baghdad.
Mark, talk about the other times. You served 5 tours, combat tours in Iraq. What about the other tours? I mean, what were you involved in? What was your work? What did you do?
Okay, so certainly 2003 was combat operations.
Right.
But I knew as a field artilleryman, after hostilities ceased in 2003, I knew if I went back, it would be in a different role. The artillery is a very adaptive branch, and the Army recognizes that, and so the Army, in its infinite wisdom, used the artillery for different missions. So I can give you an example. For in 2005 and 2006, when I went to Iraq, I was assigned to Baghdad to run the Iraqi national referendum in elections for Baghdad. So I was responsible for securing up to about 1,548 polling sites where Iraqis would go to on referendum day or election day to go and vote. And so, I kind of took that mission on as an artillery. I'm an artilleryman, but I took that on for the division to prepare for those two events. When I went back in 2007 and 2008, which was part of the surge, again, there wasn't a significant artillery mission, so General Odierno at the time, who was Chief Staff of the Army, reached out to our organization and said, well, you're going to go down to a place called Camp Bucca in southeastern Iraq, and you're going to do detainee operations. So for 8 months, my organization did detainee operations. And then lastly—
Explain that a little bit. What was
detainee operations. So we understood that as part of the surge for the United States Army or military, that there would be an uptick in the number of detainees picked up throughout the battlefield.
Sure. Okay.
So they knew there was going to be a surge in fighting. There would also be a surge in detainees. And so my organization was sent down there to build some, what they referred to as hasty detainee compounds. And that is, as the detainees came in to Camp Bucca, my organization would provide the guard force for those detainees.
I see, yeah.
Yep. And then finally in 2011, when I went over there, I was part of the 18th Airborne Corps staff, and my role was completely non-lethal, more information operations, influencing type operations, which really falls within the fires or the field artillery community. We have the lethal aspect of the field artillery branch, and we also have the non-lethal kind of information operations, influencing behaviors and that sort of stuff. So aside from 2003 and fighting, everything I did from then were completely different missions.
Right. Mark, you're a retired military officer. You've studied about war. Talk about the differences between the Iraq War and our efforts in Afghanistan as compared to World War II and Korea and Vietnam. Talk about the differences as you see them.
Well, I think throughout our history, I think the United States government has always had an overwhelming advantage over our enemies. Some technological, some just will, intestinal fortitude, that sort of stuff. So, I mean, I guess, not having experiences outside of Operation Iraqi Freedom, I can see I can imagine the will of the fighting man back in World War II, Vietnam, and that sort of stuff. His ability to understand the enemy, his ability to fight decisively over his enemy. And so from that standpoint, I think whether it's World War II or Vietnam or Korea or World War I, I think I think our soldiers were better trained, more experienced, had a better understanding of the enemy's capabilities, and I think obviously we're victorious. I think as you move through time, certainly we gain a greater technological advantage to where, I think in 2003, I can't imagine any weapon system that the Iraqis had that could defeat, the United States military weapon system. So that in itself, when we were talking about fear and crossing the border, I knew we had an advantage. I knew we were going to win, right? So that kind of attitude and that kind of experience, I think, gives us an overwhelming advantage, regardless of the campaign or the war.
How do you feel, Mark, when people call you a hero, when they read or hear about what you did in combat? How does it make you feel?
Well, I'm grateful, certainly. I'd like to think of myself more as a role model than a hero. And then, so if you call me a hero, there's about, in my brigade, there's about 3,500 other heroes. So I might be the one today that's called out, but at the end of the day, there's 3,500 of my best buddies out there that are also heroes that aren't sitting in this chair right now, that weren't recognized in the last year like I've been. But all I can do is give a shout out to them and acknowledge their professionalism and their contribution not only to a grateful nation, but to me. I'm sitting here because of 3,500 of my best friends.
Do you often wonder, would you do it all over again?
Absolutely. Yeah. When I was younger, again, I didn't know what I didn't know. So when I was 18 years old and thinking about ROTC, I looked at the Army as an opportunity because I didn't know. I just didn't have the experiences. I wasn't smart enough. If I fast forward 30 years, now I look at the Army, as I look back, as having been a privilege to serve, not an opportunity. So I look at it completely differently. I tell stories to young people. In your 20s, you're just so full of vigor, adrenaline. You're just out there getting it done. I think I think in your 30s, you start to gain an appreciation for what you're doing in terms of serving. Then when you get to your 40s, you have a deep appreciation of your contributions that you've made to your country. And then I tell them by the time you get to your 50s, you can't sit at the dinner table without crying when you say the blessing. Because over time and as you mature in age, the realization comes to you about the contributions and those sorts of things that you've had for your nation.
Excellent way to put it, yeah. You also served tours in Korea, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait during your military career, and each country has their own customs. I want you to talk about what it was like to serve in all those different places. And do you speak different languages, or how many different languages do you speak?
A little bit of Arabic, just enough
to get by.
Just enough to get by.
Yeah.
Some greetings and that sort of stuff. I grew up as a military dependent.
Right.
I don't recall all of my experience as a young kid anymore. But the 3 years I had in Huntsville before I moved off, they were wonderful. I got to meet some friends. I've still got some lifelong friends from Huntsville. But I think I was accustomed to moving every 2 or 3 years as a child, and so nothing was different for me as an adult. Moving to some of those countries like Korea and spending time in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and others is just my chance to see a completely different culture, learn about other customs and courtesies and cultures, and kind of share those with my children. Now, certainly they weren't able to come to some of those assignments, but I've taken them overseas where they've been able to enjoy some of that.
Has it changed your perspective on life, about going to different countries and seeing how other people live? And
I'm very thankful for being an American, really. I just spent 2 weeks in Saudi Arabia, and the best part of going overseas is coming home. And this is just a wonderful country. And so to get out there and see some of those other countries is one thing, but coming home is really what I live for.
You've been in war, and through the years, I'm sure you've seen a few movies or TV shows depicting action during the time you served. From what you've seen, is it pretty much accurate, or is it just Hollywood stuff? Well, how would you answer that?
Well, I've seen a few, so I'll just give you an example. Black Hawk Down, I watched that movie, I think back in the mid-90s or something like that, but the author came to Fort Benning as part of a leadership development series, and he spoke to our organization. He brought all of the real world, the real soldiers from that particular mission.
Yeah,
so
that actually served.
Yeah, sure. So Chief Durant and Staff Sergeant Evanton and some of the others were actually on the first row, and so they got to speak. The author got to speak, and I just felt like that was completely for the most part. There's always going to be a little bit of Hollywood in these movies, but that was I felt like that was a complete rendition of what actually occurred. Some of these other, Hurt Locker, I think, is another movie that was interesting. I didn't really feel comfortable sitting through the whole thing.
A little exaggeration maybe in at least some places.
But I think for the most part, Hollywood's done pretty well.
Pretty good job, yeah.
Yep.
I want you to tell us about your family. When did you get married and start raising a family? And your wife, had the opportunity to meet her at the Hall of Heroes banquet. Very nice lady. What was her name again?
Leslie.
Leslie, yeah. And tell us about your family.
So I got married in 2005. 13 years I've been married.
Yeah.
So my wife and I are a blended family. So there's his, hers, and ours. So we have, my wife Leslie has one child.
I see.
And I had 3. And then together we made 2. So now we're up to 6 children, ranging from age 27 down to 10. And again, that's the best part of being being who I am is I just have an amazing family, very supportive. We didn't talk about the role they play in 5 combat tours and all that sort of stuff. But to think about it this way, I knew what I was doing when I went overseas.
Yeah.
So when they gave me an assignment to go overseas, I knew I had a task and purpose. I knew what I was doing. The families don't know what's going to happen when you leave. So really, when I leave, 2 weeks later, one of the children gets the flu, right?
Yeah.
The wife has to deal with that.
Yeah, yeah.
So just the incredible sacrifices that Leslie and my family have had to make over the years
Yeah.
is something that I'd like to highlight today as well, because they don't get the accolades that we do as service members out there, you know, kind of getting her done in combat and that sort of stuff. But amazing woman, Leslie. The 6 kids are amazing, and I'm just as proud to call myself, you know, part of their family as they are of me.
Do you think any of your children will go into the military?
I've got one.
Yeah.
My 11-year-old says he's going. So
Yeah.
my father never did sway me one way or the other. I mean, it's just something I picked up in college. I mean, and it just happened.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the same approach I'm going to take with my children. I want my children to go out and do whatever their heart tells them. So everything we've done in the past is all in our mind. Everything we look forward to doing is all in our heart. So it's going to be completely up to them. I'll guide them in whatever direction they want me to, but at the end of the day, it'll be their decision.
Their decision to make, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you retired from the military a few years ago, and you're still going back to some of the countries, as you mentioned, you've served in, Saudi Arabia, of course. Tell us about the line of work you're in now. What exactly do you do, and how often are you, gone from, serving over in Saudi Arabia again?
Sure, I work for an organization called the United States Army Security Assistance Command.
Okay.
And essentially what we do is we execute foreign military sales for the U.S. government from an Army standpoint. So we sell material, services, training, that sort of stuff to right now about 187 partners around the globe. I think what's satisfying about my job, I do work for Saudi Arabia, so I spent a couple of weeks over there this last month. But what we do out there is we build partner capacity with our partners. And so the goal is, if we can improve the capacity and the capability of X country, and we can use Saudi Arabia as an example, then it's less likely in the future we'll be relied upon to go out and bid other nations' wars, problems, those sorts of things. So I'm very satisfied with what I do, because I think that my service in building capacity overseas lessens the chance that a U.S. soldier will have to deploy in the future and do someone else's work.
That's always a good effort.
I love it.
Yeah. Mark, you were inducted in 2017 into the Madison County Military Hall of Heroes by your fellow veterans. How did that make you feel? How do you feel about that now, being inducted?
Well, I think it's a distinct honor,
Yeah.
but again, there's a lot of people out there that I could have put in my place during that ceremony. But certainly, again, I'm humbled by the thought that somebody would think of me in that way, to nominate me and ultimately get inducted into the Heritage Foundation. I think what I'll do from here on out, one, I'll get a little more involved in the foundation, and I'll do my part in seeking out another one of those individuals that meet the high standards required to be inducted, and I'll nominate somebody next year.
Good. Well, it's recognition well deserved, if we will say
Thank
that.
you.
What advice, Mark, would you give to young people who may be considering going into the military or thinking about a military career? You spent 27 years in the military. Give us some advice for young people that may be looking for that opportunity.
Well, and you just hit it. It's an opportunity. So again, you really have to go with your heart, but in terms of determining a lifelong career field. But what I will say is that you ought to go look at it as an opportunity. I mean, it's an amazing experience. The camaraderie that you build with your fellow service members is incredible. The friendships you make are lifelong friendships. I mean, I run into people today that I served with 27 years ago, and although it sometimes takes me a couple of minutes to remember who they are, at the end of the day, we were friends 27 and 30 years ago, working toward a common goal. So, I mean, there's a lot of professions out there, and I'm not saying that you know, you got to go in the military, but I would.
It's not for everyone,
no,
is it?
It's not for everybody,
Yeah, right.
but at least take that into consideration as you're growing up, because again, at age 18 and 20, I had no idea what I wanted to do, and I think a lot of the kids these days don't necessarily have, you know, a clear view of what they want to accomplish long term in life. And the only thing I'd ask you to do is, you know, talk to your ROTC instructors in high school and kind of observe what they do and that sort of stuff. And if you see some interest in it, seek it out. And maybe it'll be for you and maybe it won't. But at least give it a chance.
Yeah, give it a shot. Well, Mark, we want to thank you for participating in our oral history interview series and allowing us to preserve your military experience for the people of this community. And thank you, sir, for your service to our country.
Thank you again, my privilege.
Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
Now, if you'd like more information regarding this interview or any interview in our Military Heritage Series, please contact the Madison County Military Heritage Commission website at mcmhc.org. I'm Tom Kinnemer. Thank you for being with us.